Chase Briscoe and the 19 team hit with a massive L2 penalty, over 100 points deducted. And is the Daytona 500 starting to lose some legitimacy? Denny Hamlin talked about this on his podcast this week. Let's break it all down on Dirty Air. Hello everybody, welcome to Dirty Air. I'm your host Alex Lambert, and we have a lot to get into involving Chase Briscoe, a massive L2 penalty, 100-point deduction, 10 playoff points. We'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the Daytona 500 a little bit more as well later on in the show. The TV ratings came out. They're a little bit down from 2023, but up from last year's Monday race. We'll talk about all that. Let's go ahead and get right on into it. And there is certainly a massive penalty that has just been announced for the 19 team. James Small, Chase Briscoe, 100 regular season points have been deducted from them after messing with the rear spoiler. Not too sure what happened there, modifying the spoiler. Once again, that spoiler is a part that comes from NASCAR, and you're not supposed to modify it at all. You're supposed to sort of just really put it in place, and that's what is new with these next-gen cars. You're not supposed to modify any part that comes from NASCAR's vendors. You're supposed to leave those alone and just put them in place, like putting Legos together when it comes to those particular parts. And if you modify them, we've seen it with Brad Keselowski in the past, we've seen it with other teams in the past multiple times, you will receive a massive penalty. We saw it with Hendrick Motorsports and Colleague over some louvers a couple of years ago. I think that was 2023. Big deal when this penalty hits, and this is a massive issue for them. This is a new team, right? This is James Small trying to prove something without Martin Truex Jr. This is Chase Briscoe coming from Stewart-Haas Racing over to Joe Gibbs Racing, and you've already had a massive 100-point deduction. 88 points out of the playoffs right now after the first week, minus 67 points now. You're in negatives to start out the season. This is a huge deal. Joe Gibbs will try to appeal the penalty moving forward. We'll have to see what happens with that appeals process, but as it stands right now, Chase Briscoe is very behind, not to mention those 10 playoff points is also big as well. If he does find a way to make the playoffs, shoot, he could start at negative in that as well. That's a realistic possibility right now for Chase Briscoe. This is a huge setback for his 2025 NASCAR Cup season with a brand new team. James Small also suspended for 4 weeks. James Small is going to miss the first 4 of the first 5 weeks of the year with a new driver, a new team trying to prove that they can win without Martin Truex Jr. Just a really big problem for this team. I think it is a massive issue what has happened today following Daytona. You cannot have those issues in modifying car parts, especially at a racetrack like Daytona, right? I know you're looking for every inch, but Daytona's a track you cannot leave with a penalty like this. Certainly interesting, and we're going to have to continue to monitor this issue moving forward. Todd Gilliland, Cody Ware also received 10 regular season point penalties. They'll receive a 10-point penalty each for some issues in pre-qualifying, why they couldn't get through tech. We had 3 drivers with penalties, obviously Chase Briscoe with the big one. Now, another thing that came out today is the Daytona 500 TV rating. So here it is, 6,761,000 viewers average for the entirety of the race from lap 1 to lap 201 in the overtime, but to the finish of the Daytona 500. That is up from last year's Monday afternoon race that started at 4 o'clock last year on Monday. But this is a number that probably would have been way higher. You see here, Fox also mentioned that it peaked around just under 8 million viewers from 206 to 215. That was the first 12 laps before the rain delay. And then unfortunately, it just continued to go down. Typically, the Daytona 500's ratings tend to increase the closer you get to the finish of the race. So we could have had an average of well over 8 million viewers watching this year's Daytona 500. So it's a shame that the rain hinders this race once again. 2020, 2021, 2024, and now 2025, all affected negatively by rain. It's just certainly frustrating that we continue to have that issue. But one thing we also need to talk about when we analyze this Daytona 500, we look at the TV ratings, but Denny Hamlin on Actions Detrimental said a lot of things that I actually said, similar to what I said after the Daytona 500 on Dirty Air. But I want to sort of dive into what he said, more particularly, which is really interesting. So one thing that he said immediately after the race, and I encourage you to go check out Actions Detrimental, at least watch the first 15 minutes. It's just good to get a perspective from somebody like him that really cares about the Daytona 500 and the prestige of winning the Great American Race. And he talks about this in great detail. But the first thing that he said after the race and on his podcast is you have to make it to turn 4 to have a potential shot to win the race. And I don't understand why we've sort of lost this narrative. Cole Custer, causing an accident on the last lap on the back straightaway doesn't make sense to me. You have to make it to the checkered flag. If you want to see the checkered flag and then you want to start door slamming, that's what Denny Hamlin said, then it's okay, then it's acceptable because you can get there and it's a chance that you would win, but you're not going to win when you're wrecking on the back straightaway in the Daytona 500. It's just not going to work. And NASCAR is also going to help with this because they've set a precedence now that they're not going to throw a caution until after the leaders cross the line. We had that issue on Thursday. They seem to have fixed that, and they're going to hopefully be consistent with this moving forward. So if NASCAR's not going to throw a caution on the final lap till the leaders cross the checkered flag, then that tells me right there all that I need to know. I mean, unless there could be some, certain instances where that's not the case, but that tells me right there that I want to race all the way back and get to the final lap and get to that checkered flag. So I think we need to, going into Atlanta, because first 2 races of the year, pack racing. One of these pack races is Talladega, the third to final race. It's going to decide the championship 4. I want this to be preached by media, by other drivers. I hope it's talked about on the Fox pre-race show, is that making it to turn 4, to the checkered flag, is going to be the key component of this race weekend for every single driver. That's what I want to see. I want them to get there. If you wreck coming to the line, not much you can really say about that. Going for it, whatever it may be, is certainly interesting, but you have to be able to get to the line. Love that Denny Hamlin said that. I hope that is the narrative going into this week at Atlanta, and more so because you do get spread out some at Atlanta, not a real super speedway. Going into Talladega in April, I hope this is still the narrative. And then going into next year's Daytona 500, 2026, I hope that's talked about. I hope it's talked about that we want to get to the checkered flag without an incident. Once again, you go to 2021, 2023, 2024, all these races end under a crash on the final lap. Certainly interesting that that's determining this year, in this case, really determined the winner of the Daytona 500. William Byron had a good shot to win it either way, but that certainly took everyone else out of contention. Austin Cindric, Denny Hamlin. That was a great storyline. Austin Cindric trying to win 2 of his 4 Daytona 500 starts. Denny Hamlin trying to win his 4th ever and put his name in elite category. That was frustrating that storyline was ended because Custer turned left on a straightaway. Another thing is, he actually did put the spotlight on NASCAR for a moment. So I said after the video originally, after the Daytona 500, that this was all placed on the drivers, that you can't really place this on NASCAR. Denny Hamlin did say that with the cars being slower, you've slowed the cars down, you've given them so much grip. And this is another reason I like the Daytona 500 during the daytime, because you have less grip, cars are a little more squirrely, easier to crash, so it makes you have to let off, and handling comes more into play. But he says with these new cars, they've become so even and so easy to drive at Daytona, where they're less squirrely, it's harder for them to wreck, that it actually causes these issues because they don't have to give each other enough room. You can go back to 2015, 2016, and other previous Daytona 500s in the old car, and you see those drivers have to give a lot of room, and that certainly, I think, produced better racing. It made slingshot moves at the front more exciting. It produced pretty good racing in those Daytona 500s, which is certainly interesting. And I think, once again, you go back to 2016, we still look at that as one of the best finishes in the history of the Daytona 500. It was the closest, and there was no wreck, no big wreck, I don't think, at any point in the 2016 Daytona 500. I'm not saying you need that. You need it to be completely clean, but that just shows that it can be done, and you can still have a historic moment and a historic winner and a historic race, right, that you can go back to and be exciting. That's certainly interesting. NASCAR could do some things to make the cars faster. From what it sounds like, NASCAR has slowed the cars down somewhat to prevent cars from flipping. We saw Ryan Preece flip over completely in the Daytona 500. You're probably not going to be able to do that unless you slow the cars down an insane amount that you just can't slow them down to. So certainly that's interesting. But that's really all I wanted to talk about today. Once again, you had Chase Briscoe with that massive penalty, a couple other drivers with some smaller penalties. There was just some pre-qualifying issues. And then, of course, you had the TV ratings come out. And then I wanted to address the Daytona 500 one more time before heading into Atlanta. But this is the last time you should see me unless something crazy happens until the finish of the Atlanta race on Sunday. So certainly that should be interesting. And, of course, about Kyle Busch being, 35th in points right now? Let's get rowdy.